let's ask ourselves a difficult question. How sustainable is the global capitalist system? But before we get there, let's make sure we're on the same page when it comes to what people mean when they talk about economics. It's perhaps useful to go back to the roots of the word economics, which are commonly dated back to a Greek thinker who predated Aristotle, Xenophon. Economicus referred to the management of a good household. And you can see, if you use this original sense of the term economics, that it is a very, very vital science, if you agree to call it that, when it comes to dealing with problems of sustainability. There are, however, many schools of economic thought, and it's useful to talk about them quickly. Most people, when they refer to economics, are talking about a very particular school, which is called neoclassical economics, which is also orthodox economics. All the other schools of economic thought, and there are literally over a dozen of them, and they aren't all fitting together nicely, are together collectively referred to as heterodox economics. This course could have taken any of these branches of economics as a point of departure. And it's useful to know also that there is significant tension between the different schools of economics. Marxist economics, you might have heard of, Schumpeterian economics, ecological economics, all these different branches, all these different schools of economics have interesting and useful things to say about the challenges of sustainability facing us. Anyway, let's move on. One more point about economics and how it came to take the form that it does today. There were several critically important thinkers, European thinkers, in the so-called classical age. I'm thinking of Thomas Hobbes, who wrote Leviathan, John Locke, 2 treatises of government, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a French philosopher who, amongst other things, wrote Discourse on Inequality. The point I quickly want to make is that all these thinkers, and none of them would have been called economists. The term economist is a fairly recent invention. If anything, they were political economists. The point I want to make, and we'll come back to this later, is that they took human nature to be primordially individualistic. And working together as a collective, as a society, was in their mind and in the mind of most people, the collective conscious that sort of reigned the European intellectual tradition, a fairly recent invention. Of course, now we know through archaeology and anthropology that it's actually the other way around. Humans were primordially collective species, highly communal species, and the sort of individualism that we see around us today in some countries, especially richer countries, is actually the more recent invention. And this might have important implications for how economics came to think of the world in the way it does.